The Crystal Ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel sparkled with 1,000 points of light, each crystal chandelier casting rainbow prisms across the faces of elegantly dressed guests. I stood in the shadows near the entrance, watching the scene unfold before me like some bizarre theater production. The bride, my sister Olivia, floated through the crowd in her designer wedding gown, accepting congratulations with practiced grace. Our parents, George and Margaret Wilson, followed in her wake like proud satellites, their faces glowing with the kind of joy they'd never shown for me. "Just sign here, Ms. Martinez," the wedding coordinator whispered, extending a tablet with the final payment authorization for the venue. I suppressed a smile at the false name I'd used to purchase the Rosewood Hotel chain 3 years ago. If only they knew that Elena Martinez, the mysterious hotel magnate, was actually Elena Wilson, the daughter they declared dead a decade ago. I scrawled my signature and handed back the tablet, adjusting the elegant mask that covered the upper half of my face. The masquerade theme had been Olivia's idea, though I doubted she realized how perfectly it served my purpose. Behind their own masks, not even my parents recognized the daughter they'd erased. The ceremony was beautiful, I murmured to the coordinator, my voice carrying the slight Spanish accent I cultivated for my Elena Martinez persona. "Your staff has done an excellent job." She beamed at the praise, unaware that I signed her paychecks. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. We're so honored you came personally to oversee the Wilson wedding. They're one of Boston's most prominent families, you know." I knew all too well. The Wilsons had been Boston aristocracy for generations, their shipping empire dating back to the 1800s. That legacy of success and perfection had been everything to my parents, and the reason they found it so easy to erase their defective daughter. My crime? Refusing to marry the man they'd chosen for me, the heir to a rival shipping company. At 22, fresh out of business school with dreams of modernizing the family company, I dared to suggest that arranged marriages were outdated, that maybe the shipping industry needed innovation more than it needed mergers through matrimony. The argument that followed still echoed in my nightmares. My father's rage, my mother's cold disappointment, and finally the ultimatum: marry Jonathan Porter or be cut off completely. I chose freedom. The next morning, I emptied my trust fund, a mere $50,000 they'd forgotten to freeze, and disappeared. I spent the first month in a cheap motel, teaching myself everything I could about modern business practices, digital transformation, and venture capital. I changed my appearance, adopted a new accent, and built Elena Martinez from scratch. What I didn't know then was that my parents had chosen to deal with my departure in the most dramatic way possible. Instead of admitting their daughter had defied them, they told everyone I died in a sailing accident off the coast. They even held a funeral, complete with an empty casket and tearful eulogies about their beloved Elena, taken too soon. I learned about my own death 6 months later when I tried to contact my younger sister. The email I sent bounced back, but not before I saw her social media profile picture, Olivia in black, standing beside our parents at my memorial service. That was the moment Elena Wilson truly died and Elena Martinez was born. "Ms. Martinez?" The coordinator's voice pulled me back to the present. "Would you like to be seated for dinner?" I nodded, following her to a table near the back of the ballroom. Close enough to observe everything, far enough to maintain my cover. The irony of paying for my sister's wedding venue and owning the mansion our parents still lived in wasn't lost on me. Over the past decade, I'd systematically purchased every property the Wilsons used, every hotel they frequented, and a controlling interest in most of their business partners. They just didn't know it yet. My father's voice suddenly carried across the room, loud enough to reach my table. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please." The crowd quieted as George Wilson raised his champagne glass. He cut an impressive figure in his tuxedo, silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. 10 years had added distinguished lines to his face, but hadn't diminished his commanding presence. "Today is a day of joy, celebrating the marriage of my only daughter, Olivia, to the love of her life." Only daughter. The words hit like a physical blow, even after all these years. "But it's also a day tinged with bittersweetness," he continued, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "I can't help but think of our beloved Elena, Olivia's sister, who left us far too soon. She would have loved to see this day." Beside him, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, the perfect breathing mother still mourning her lost child. If only they knew that lost child was sitting 30 feet away, controlling more wealth and power than the Wilson family had accumulated in 6 generations. A server appeared at my elbow. "More champagne, Ms. Martinez?" I accepted the glass, using the moment to collect myself. I hadn't come here for revenge, or at least, that's what I told myself. I'd built my empire through genuine innovation, transforming struggling businesses into modern powerhouses. The fact that I now controlled most of my family's business interests was just convenient. Such a shame about their older daughter. The elderly woman seated beside me whispered, clearly hoping to share gossip with the mysterious hotel owner. "The poor girl died in a sailing accident. They say she was quite troubled before the end, defying her parents, refusing a brilliant marriage match. Some even whispered she might have, you know." She made a vague gesture. "Done it on purpose." My fingers tightened around the champagne flute. Of course they'd implied my death was suicide. It fit their narrative of the rebellious daughter who couldn't handle the pressure of their expectations. Better than admitting the truth, that I'd chosen freedom over their suffocating control. The sound of clinking glass drew everyone's attention. Olivia had stood to make her own speech, her new husband beaming beside her. My little sister had grown into a stunning woman, though her beauty had a brittle quality that reminded me of our mother. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice carrying the same finishing school polish I'd once been forced to learn. "As Father said, this day is perfect in almost every way. The only thing missing is my dear sister, Elena." I took a slow sip of champagne, watching her performance. Elena was more than my big sister. She was my best friend, my protector, my role model. Olivia's voice wavered perfectly. "When we were little, she used to tell me that anything was possible if you were brave enough to chase your dreams. I just wish," she paused for dramatic effect, "I just wish she could see that I finally found my dream." The crowd murmured sympathetically. I fought the urge to laugh. Olivia had been 12 when I left, old enough to understand exactly what our parents had done. She'd chosen their side, happily stepping into the role of perfect only daughter. The sister who'd supposedly been her best friend hadn't even raided a phone call to warn me about my impending death. As dinner was served, I found myself studying the head table. My parents sat there with Olivia and her new husband, along with his equally wealthy family. They looked like something out of a society magazine. Perfectly groomed, perfectly poised, perfectly false. 10 years ago, their perfect facade had crushed me. Now I saw them clearly, small people desperately clinging to outdated power, unaware that the world had changed around them. The shipping industry they dominated for generations was transforming, and they hadn't adapted. Their empire was crumbling, propped up only by the secret investments I'd made through shell companies. "Ms. Martinez?" A man in an expensive suit approached my table. I recognized him as James Porter, my almost father-in-law, though he aged considerably. "I hope you're enjoying the evening. I must say, we were surprised and honored when we heard you'd be attending personally." I smiled behind my mask. "I make it a point to oversee special events at my flagship properties, Mr. Porter. Especially for such distinguished families." He preened at the compliment. "Yes, well, the Wilsons and Porters have been pillars of Boston society for generations. Though I must admit, recent years have been challenging." "Oh." I kept my tone merely polite, though I knew exactly how challenging things had been for both families. My companies had slowly acquired controlling interests in their major shipping routes, modernizing operations and squeezing their profit margins. "The industry isn't what it used to be," he said, sighing heavily. "These tech startups, these modern logistics companies, they're disrupting everything. Why, just last month we lost our biggest client to some upstart called Phoenix Maritime." I managed not to smile. Phoenix Maritime was one of my first acquisitions, transformed from a failing local shipper into a digital logistics powerhouse. "Progress can be difficult to navigate," I offered diplomatically. "Progress," he scoffed. "In my day, business was built on relationships, on family connections. Did you know my son was supposed to marry George Wilson's older daughter? Now that would have been a merger worth celebrating. But the girl had other ideas." He shook his head. "Tragic. What happened to her? Though perhaps for the best, given her rebellious nature." The crystal flute in my hand threatened to shatter under my grip. Before I could respond, a commotion at the head table drew everyone's attention. My mother had stood up suddenly, swaying slightly, Apparently the champagne had flowed too freely. I simply must say, she announced, her voice carrying that peculiar precision of the elegantly drunk. How wonderful it is to see all our dear friends here, especially those who supported us after we lost our Elena. I sat perfectly still, watching the train wreck unfold. Such a difficult time, she continued, dabbing at her eyes. Having to tell everyone that our daughter, that she, well, the shame of it all. But we preserved the family name, didn't we, George? We gave her a proper send-off, even if she didn't deserve. Margaret. My father's voice cut through her rambling like a steel blade. Perhaps you should sit down. But the champagne had loosened something in my mother's perfect facade. Oh, but darling, I simply must tell Ms. Martinez what an honor it is to have her here. Such a successful woman, and self-made at that. Nothing at all like our poor Elena, who thought she could reject her family obligations and succeed on her own. She laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. As if a Wilson could ever survive without family connections. Why ever she didn't even make it a month before. That's enough. My father stood, his face flushed with anger. Margaret, you're making a scene. The ballroom had gone silent, hundreds of guests watching my mother's meltdown with horrified fascination. Olivia was hiding her face in her hands, her new husband patting her shoulder awkwardly. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound drew my mother's attention, and she focused on me with the unsettling intensity of the truly drunk. Ms. Martinez, she called out, you simply must tell us your secret. How does a woman with no family name, no connections, build such an empire? My Elena thought she could do the same, you know. Thought she was smarter than generations of Wilson business sense. And now she's what, mother? The words left my mouth before I could stop them, my careful accent slipping. My mother froze, something flickering across her face. Recognition, impossible as it was. But the moment passed. She blinked at me owlishly, confused by the question from a stranger. My father had reached her by then, taking her arm firmly. I apologize for my wife, he said smoothly, the excitement of the day combined with the memories. Please, everyone, enjoy your dinner. He led my mother away, probably to sleep off the champagne in one of the hotel's luxury suites. Suites I owned in a hotel I owned, just like I owned the mansion they still lived in and controlling interest in the companies they thought were still theirs. I sank back into my chair, hands trembling slightly. I come too close to revealing myself, letting old pain override a decade of careful planning. The elderly woman beside me patted my arm sympathetically. Don't mind them, dear, she said. Old money families like the Wilsons, they can't handle change. Today's world belongs to people like you. Self-made, forward-thinking. Why, I heard your hotel chain is expanding into shipping and logistics now. Among other things, I murmured, recovering my accent. She had no idea that my hotel chain was just the tip of the iceberg. Through various shell corporations and holding companies, Elena Martinez controlled an empire worth billions, built specifically to systematically dismantle everything the Wilsons had ever valued. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of small talk and subtle observation. I watched my sister dance with her new husband, my father smooth things over with embarrassed guests, my mother nowhere to be seen. They looked exactly like what they were, relics of a dying era, clinging to appearances while their real power slipped away. When I finally stood to leave, the wedding coordinator rushed over. Ms. Martinez, will you be staying the night? We've prepared the presidential suite. No, I said quietly, watching my father lead a round of toasts. I think I've seen enough family drama for one evening. She laughed nervously, clearly uncertain how to respond to her boss's dry tone. I handed her a thick envelope, a wedding gift for my sister, though she'd never know who it was really from. Make sure the bride and groom have everything they need, I instructed, and send some water and a spear into Mrs. Wilson's room. She'll need it tomorrow. As I walked out of the Crystal Ballroom, I heard my father's voice one last time, to family, the most precious thing we have. I didn't turn around. Elena Wilson was dead, after all, they'd made sure of that themselves. But Elena Martinez was very much alive, and she was just getting started. In my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed my assistant. Maya, execute phase 2. It's time the Wilsons learned exactly who they're dealing with. The next few weeks would change everything. But that's another part of the story. The morning after Olivia's wedding, I sat in my penthouse office overlooking Boston Harbor. watching the Wilson shipping vessels crawl across the water like tiny, obsolete insects. My mother's drunken outburst had accelerated my timeline, but perhaps that was for the best. 10 years of silent accumulation had positioned all the pieces perfectly. Now it was time to play the game. The numbers are in from last night, Maya announced, entering with her tablet. My assistant of 8 years was the only person who knew both Elena Martinez and Elena Wilson. The Wilson Porter wedding cost them just over $300,000. They put it all on credit. I nodded, unsurprised. And their current financial position? Critical. Maya pulled up detailed spreadsheets. Wilson Shipping's quarterly losses have hit $12 million. They've mortgaged everything they own, which technically means they've mortgaged everything you own since you hold all their properties through shell companies. They're 3 months behind on payments to Phoenix Maritime, which means they're 3 months behind on payments to me. I finished. What about the Porter merger they're counting on? James Porter's company isn't in much better shape. The merger would be like tying 2 stones together and expecting them to float. I smiled, remembering James Porter's condescending comments at the wedding. The man who'd once thought himself worthy of arranging my marriage was now drowning in debt, his company hemorrhaging clients to my more efficient operations. Send notices to all their major clients, I instructed. It's time for Phoenix Maritime to raise its rates. Let's see how many stay loyal to outdated shipping methods when modern logistics could save them millions. Maya made a note, then hesitated. There's something else. Your father has called an emergency board meeting for Wilson Shipping tomorrow morning. Finally, I've been waiting for this moment, carefully orchestrating it through a decade of strategic moves. Prepare the paperwork. It's time for Elena Martinez to make her first public appearance at Wilson Shipping. Are you sure? Maya's concern was evident. Once you start this. They buried their daughter to save face, I said quietly. Now they'll learn exactly what that decision cost them. The next morning, I dressed with particular care. A blood-red Armani suit that projected power, Louboutin heels that clicked like weapons on marble floors, and a small gold compass pendant that had once belonged to my grandmother. The only Wilson who had truly loved me. The Wilson Shipping headquarters hadn't changed in 10 years. The same imposing granite building, the same brass nameplate declaring founded 1847. The same portrait of my great-grandfather glowering in the lobby. But there was an undercurrent of tension today. Nervous whispers and darting glances as employees noticed my arrival. Ms. Martinez. The receptionist jumped to attention. We weren't expecting. That is, the board meeting is private. Not anymore. I handed her a thick envelope. My credentials. As the majority shareholder of Phoenix Maritime and holder of significant Wilson shipping debt, I have every right to attend. Her hands shook as she verified the paperwork. I watched her face pale as she realized exactly how much power Elena Martinez wielded. Of course. 14th floor boardroom. The elevator ride gave me a moment to center myself. In my ear, Maya's voice provided updates through a discreet earpiece. All board members present. Your father's trying to push through an emergency restructuring plan. He still thinks he can save the company without outside help. The boardroom doors were heavy oak, stretching from floor to ceiling. I paused for a moment, hearing familiar voices through the wood. Can't accept these terms, my father was saying. Phoenix Maritime is trying to steal our company piece by piece. We don't have a choice, George, another voice responded. We're bleeding clients, our ships are outdated, and this mysterious Elena Martinez owns half the ports we use. I pushed the doors open. The conversation died instantly. 12 men in expensive suits stared at me. Old money, old power, old ideas. At the head of the table, my father stood frozen mid-gesture, his face darkening as he recognized the woman who'd attended his daughter's wedding. Ms. Martinez, he managed finally. This is a private meeting. Not anymore. I strode to the table, my heels echoing in the silence. Please don't let me interrupt your discussion of my company's terms. Your company? He spat the words. Phoenix Maritime is nothing but an upstart using digital gimmicks to steal established clients. Wilson Shipping has survived for 6 generations, and will survive for precisely 12 more days. I cut in smoothly. Unless you accept the merger terms I'm about to offer. I placed a folder on the table. Inside was the culmination of 10 years' work. Documents proving my ownership of their buildings, their warehouses, their homes. Evidence of their mounting debts, their failed modernization attempts, their desperate efforts to maintain appearances while their empire crumbled. "This is impossible," my father whispered, flipping through pages. "These properties, our house, the hotel chain, all belong to me," I confirmed, "along with controlling interest in most of your remaining clients' companies. Face it, Mr. Wilson, you're not just losing, you've already lost." He slammed the folder down. "Who are you? Some tech billionaire trying to dismantle a legacy business. You have no idea what family tradition means." I felt my carefully constructed mask crack, just a little. Family tradition. I took off my designer sunglasses, meeting his eyes directly, like the tradition of forcing your children into loveless marriages, or the tradition of declaring them dead when they refuse to comply. The color drained from his face. "No," he whispered. "It's not possible." Elena, one of the older board members, breathed, recognition dawning. "My God, Elena Wilson." I smiled, not pleasantly. "Elena Martinez, actually. I took the name after you killed me. Makes for a better corporate image than being the dead daughter of a failing shipping magnate." Chaos erupted in the boardroom. Board members shouted questions. My father stumbled back into his chair, and somewhere in the building an emergency alarm began to wail. "Enough." My voice cut through the noise like a whip. "You have exactly 24 hours to accept the merger proposal. If you refuse, I call in all outstanding debts and sell your remaining assets to my subsidiaries. Your choice." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and father, you might want to check on mother. I hear she's still recovering from quite a spectacle at Olivia's wedding." Security guards burst in as I walked out, responding to some panic button my father had probably pressed. I smiled at them as I passed. They worked for me too, though they didn't know it yet. In the elevator, Maya's voice came through my earpiece. "Well, that was dramatic." "They always loved theatrics," I replied. "I learned from the best. Your mother's waiting in the lobby." I stiffened. "What?" "She arrived about 5 minutes ago. Looks like she's mostly recovered from the champagne." The elevator doors opened and there she was. Margaret Wilson, Boston society matron. Perfectly coiffed even in the middle of her world collapsing. She stood near the great-grandfather's portrait, and for a moment I saw myself at 18, standing in that same spot while she lectured me about family duty. "Ms. Martinez," she said as I approached, her voice brittle as frozen glass. Or should I say, "Elena will do." I cut her off. "But only in private. Publicly, I'm still very much dead. Your choice, as I recall." She flinched. "We did what we had to do. For the family name." "The family name?" I laughed, the sound echoing off marble walls. "Take a look around, mother. The Wilson name isn't worth the brass it's engraved on. The only thing keeping this company afloat is my money, which makes it my name on the line. You're enjoying this," she accused, "destroying everything we built." "No," I stepped closer, close enough to smell her familiar perfume. "I'm saving everything you destroyed. The company will survive, modernize, grow. The Wilson name will continue, just not in Wilson hands." Her perfectly painted lips trembled. We really thought you were dead, poverty-stricken, failed," I supplied. "You thought your rebellious daughter couldn't possibly succeed without the family's help. That's why you erased me, because the alternative was admitting you might be wrong." A tear slipped down her cheek, carving a path through expensive foundation. "Elena, please. We can fix this. Come home." I'm not that naive girl anymore. I walked past her toward the entrance. "You have 24 hours to accept the merger. Don't worry, I'll let you keep the house. Consider it a wedding gift to Olivia." Outside, my driver held the car door. Boston's summer sun felt warm on my face, so different from the artificial chill of the Wilson building. I looked back once, seeing my mother's silhouette through the glass doors, small and lost in the lobby of her crumbling empire. Maya was waiting in the car. "Phase 2 complete," she reported. "The board is in chaos, our lawyers are standing by, and rumors already spreading through the financial district. What's our next move?" I checked my phone, seeing dozens of missed calls from my father, from board members, from family friends suddenly realizing who Elena Martinez really was. Let them talk. Let them panic. The next 24 hours would determine the fate of everything they built, and everything I built to replace it. "Now," I said, "we wait, and then we show them exactly what the dead daughter can do." The next phase would change everything. But that's another part of the story. The 24 hours I'd given the Wilson Shipping Board felt like the longest of my life. I spent them in my penthouse office, watching the sun set and rise again over Boston Harbor while my phone lit up with increasingly desperate messages. From my father, "We need to talk. This isn't the way." From various board members, "Let's discuss terms privately." From family friends, "Elena, darling, we never believed." From Olivia, surprisingly, "Is it really you?" I answered none of them. Instead, I focused on the final pieces of my plan, making sure every detail was perfect. The media had already caught wind of the story. Boston's supposedly dead heiress returning as a billionaire CEO to take over her family's company. The headlines wrote themselves. The Wall Street Journal is on line 1, Maya announced, entering with fresh coffee. They want an exclusive. Not yet. I took the coffee, breathing in its familiar comfort. Let them speculate for now. The real story comes after the board's decision. And if they refuse the merger? I smiled, remembering my mother's face in the lobby. They won't. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from the board's secretary. The vote was in. Unanimous acceptance of Phoenix Maritime's merger terms. My father hadn't even voted against it. Perhaps he finally recognized the inevitable. Set up the press conference, I told Maya. 2 hours, main lobby of Wilson Shipping. Tell them Elena Martinez will be making a major announcement. And Elena Wilson. I touched the compass pendant at my neck, thinking of my grandmother. She's done hiding. The lobby was packed by the time I arrived. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashed, and a crowd of Wilson Shipping employees lined the balconies above. My father stood with the board members on a small stage, looking like he aged a decade overnight. I made them wait 10 minutes, a small petty pleasure, but I'd earned it. When I finally walked in, the crowd fell silent. I wore Wilson blue today, a power suit that matched the company's logo, with my grandmother's compass catching the light. No more hiding behind sunglasses or Spanish accents. "Thank you all for coming," I began, stepping to the podium. "My name is Elena Martinez, or, as some of you might remember, Elena Wilson." The room erupted. Cameras clicked frantically, reporters shouted questions, and somewhere in the crowd, I heard my mother gasp. I held up a hand for silence. 10 years ago, the Wilson family announced my tragic death, a sailing accident off the coast. The truth is somewhat less dramatic. I simply refused an arranged marriage and left to build my own life. My parents, finding this embarrassing, chose to bury an empty casket rather than admit their daughter had defied them. My father stepped forward, face dark with anger, but security, my security, held him back. In the decades since, I continued. I built what they said was impossible. Phoenix Maritime revolutionized shipping logistics, embracing modern technology while companies like Wilson Shipping clung to outdated methods. We grew rapidly, acquiring ports, properties, and clients, including many former Wilson assets. I turned to face the board members directly. Today, I'm announcing the merger of Wilson Shipping with Phoenix Maritime. The Wilson name will continue, but the company will be completely restructured. All current board members will be retiring with generous compensation packages. More chaos, more shouted questions. I noticed Olivia slip into the back of the room, still in her honeymoon tan, watching with wide eyes. "And now," I said, "I'll take questions. Ms. Wilson, did your family know you were alive?" "No. They were quite committed to my death." "Ms. Martinez, how did you build your empire?" "The same way I would have modernized Wilson Shipping, had I been allowed, by understanding that tradition without innovation is just slow decay." "Mr. Wilson, your response to your daughter's return?" My father stepped forward, and for a moment I saw something crack in his proud facade. "Elena, we thought. You thought I'd fail." I finished for him. "That's the problem, father. You never saw who I really was." He aged another decade before my eyes. "We did what we thought was right." "No," I corrected quietly. "You did what was easy. Erasing you was easier than admitting I might have had better ideas. Declaring me dead was easier than explaining why I left. Even now, giving up control is easier than watching your company collapse under its own weight." "Elena," my mother's voice, somewhere in the crowd. "Please." I ignored her, addressing the reporters again. "The merged company will retain the Wilson name out of respect for its history. But make no mistake, this is a complete transformation. We're moving into the future, whether the old guard likes it or not. More questions flew, but my attention was caught by Olivia pushing through the crowd. She looked different from the polished bride of 2 days ago, younger somehow, more like the sister I remembered. You were there, she said, reaching the stage. At my wedding. You washed us all. Pretend to mourn me. I raised an eyebrow. Yes. I knew. Her voice dropped so only I could hear. Sometimes I'd look at old pictures and think I saw you in the background. At charity events, business functions, I thought I was going crazy. You aren't. Why didn't you tell me? Back then, when they first. Would you have kept my secret? I studied her face, seeing the answer. No, you were always their perfect daughter. The one who'd never disobey. She flinched. I was 12. Old enough to know right from wrong. I softened slightly, seeing real pain in her eyes. But young enough to be afraid of ending up like me. A tear slipped down her cheek. I missed you. The real you, not the sanitized dead sister they talked about at parties. For the first time, I felt my own composure crack. I missed you too. But I couldn't be who they wanted. I had to be myself. Ms. Martinez. A reporter's shout broke the moment. What happens to the Wilson family now? I turned back to the crowd, professional mask firmly in place. They'll retain their personal assets, those that aren't already legally mine, and receive fair compensation for their shares. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to save a company that lost its way. And the family relationships. I looked at my father, defeated on his own stage, my mother crying quietly in the crowd. Olivia, torn between the sister she'd lost and the parents she'd chosen. Some things, I said quietly, can't be fixed with money or business deals. The Wilsons declared their daughter dead rather than accept her choices. That doesn't go away just because she came back successful. The press conference wound down after that. Reporters got their sound bites, photographers got their shots of the prodigal daughter triumphant, and gradually the crowd dispersed. I stayed on stage, watching my parents huddle with their lawyers while Olivia hovered uncertainly between us. Maya appeared at my elbow. The papers are ready to sign. Private conference room. I nodded. Give me a minute. When the lobby was almost empty, I walked to where my parents stood. Up close, they looked old and tired, nothing like the towering figures of my childhood. The lawyers will explain everything, I said professionally. You'll be comfortable. The house is yours for life, the vacation properties too. I'm not interested in leaving you destitute. Just powerless, my father said bitterly. Like you left me? I smiled without warmth. The difference is, I'm giving you a choice. Sign the papers, accept a comfortable retirement, maybe even try to rebuild something resembling a real family relationship. Or fight me, lose everything, and prove that pride really is more important than blood. My mother reached for my hand. I let her take it, feeling her expensive rings press into my palm. We thought we were protecting you, she whispered. The business world, it's so hard for women. I pulled away. I know exactly how hard it is. I succeeded not because of the Wilson name, but because you forced me to fight without it. Olivia stepped forward. Elena, what about me? You're my sister, I said simply. My door is open when you're ready to know me as I am, not who they wanted me to be. I turned to go, then paused. Oh, and mother. The next time you're drunk at a party in my hotel, try not to brag about how you erased your daughter. It's bad for both our reputations. The paperwork took less than an hour. Signatures were scratched, hands were shaken, and just like that, Wilson Shipping belonged to the daughter they'd buried. The company would keep its name but nothing else. New board, new methods, new future. Later that night, I stood in my office watching the Wilson ships in the harbor. Soon they'd be repainted with the Phoenix Maritime logo, upgraded with modern technology, integrated into my larger transportation network. The Wilson legacy would live on, just not in the way my parents had imagined. Maya brought a bottle of champagne. To the merger. To the truth, I corrected, taking a glass. Sometimes it takes a death to bring it to life. Your sister's been calling, she said carefully, and your grandmother's compass. I touched the pendant. Grandma knew. She left me this compass the day before I disappeared, said sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. Smart woman. She would have loved seeing this. I sipped the champagne, remembering. She always said the Wilson pride would sink us faster than any storm. My phone buzzed. Olivia again. This time I answered. Can we talk? She asked quietly, Really talked, just us? I looked out at the harbor where the Wilson ships floated in darkness. Come over. It's time you saw who your sister really is. After I hung up, I asked Maya to order dinner for two. It would be a long night of explanations, of bridging the gap between the sister who died and the woman who rose from those ashes. But maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this. I wasn't Elena Wilson anymore. That girl had died exactly as her parents claimed. But Elena Martinez was stronger, successful beyond their wildest fears, and finally, absolutely free. The merger would save their company. The money would save their lifestyle. But the truth, that would save me. And in the end, that's what the story was really about. Not revenge, not money, not even family. It was about a girl who had to die to become who she was always meant to be. I raised my glass to the dark harbor. To Elena Wilson, I whispered, "May she rest in peace." Then I turned away from the window and went to meet my sister, ready to begin whatever came next.